I feel like there's not enough discourse about how hard it is being a second generation immigrant and traveling back to your parents' home country and not really being able to fit in or not knowing the language. And that's exactly what I am currently experiencing. My parents immigrated to Australia when they were 18, my mum from Vietnam and my dad from China. And I grew up with my mum predominantly because my parents are separated, and that meant I was very immersed in Vietnamese culture. I know the language. I went to Vietnamese school for 10 years, so I can read, write, and speak Vietnamese pretty fluently, probably about a high school level, but I didn't really pick up Cantonese that much. My dad's from the Guangdong province in China. I'm also currently eating these barbecue skewers that I proudly ordered in my very broken Cantonese. It was kind of scary, but I'm really proud of myself for doing so, and I did that all by myself. So my dad is natively Cantonese speaking, and he does know Mandarin because he did learn that growing up in China, but it's not his mother tongue, and I think that adds another layer of difference in coming back to China, because China is now very predominantly Mandarin speaking. And even though I don't really know Cantonese that much, I did hear it growing up from spending time with my dad, so I am more familiar with the language and I do understand certain words and phrases. But when I came here, it was such a culture shock because I was just hearing Mandarin everywhere, and I'm not familiar with Mandarin at all because they are two completely separate languages, and I never really heard it growing up because my dad would just speak Cantonese. So that was like a really big culture shock for me, because I'm just like, oh my god, one, I don't know Cantonese because I didn't live with my dad and I didn't hear it as often as Vietnamese. Two, I'm in China where it's supposedly, where my roots are, where my bloodline is from, but it's a completely different culture than Cantonese culture. I feel like coming to mainland China, it's made me feel a bit of a sense of shame of not knowing my language and my culture. And it's a really interesting experience also being half of that ethnicity, I guess, as well, because even though I'm very connected to my Vietnamese roots, when I visited Vietnam last year, I had no problems at all. I could speak Vietnamese, I could speak to the locals, and I really understood the culture, even though I grew up in a Western country. And I feel like that has been such a distinct disconnect when coming to China, because I haven't been as close to the culture and the language coming to the mainland. And now that the mainland doesn't even speak Cantonese that much, it's even like a bigger difference. So when we did go to Hong Kong, I felt a lot more in tune with the culture there, and I could understand what was being said probably like 50% of the time, and that made me feel more comfortable. And it kind of made me feel like, I shouldn't feel shame for not understanding Mandarin, because that's not even my culture. Like, that's just, obviously the government trying to nationalize a language. But it's also made me realize that I do know a lot more Cantonese than I thought I did. Because I didn't grow up living with my dad, I didn't think that I could speak a lot of Cantonese or understand much of it. But now that I'm here for just a week, I'm picking up so many things, and I'm realizing I know a lot of vocab that I didn't think I did. And I even had a conversation with my grandpa slightly in Cantonese, very broken Cantonese, like only a few phrases, but even that made me feel like, oh, I can actually pick this up pretty fast because my grandpa only speaks Cantonese. And it was just nice being able to say even just a couple of phrases to him, because I always felt like I wanted to communicate with him, but I couldn't because I didn't know Cantonese. And it's a very different relationship to my relationship with my Vietnamese grandparents, who've sadly passed away now, but I could have full conversations with them in Vietnamese. And I feel like that's a very specific child of immigrant parents experience. I'm also currently in Silhing, which is my dad's hometown, the town that he grew up in, and it's in the Guangdong province, around an hour train ride from the capital, Guangzhou. And it's also interesting seeing my dad experience China from a lens where he was born here and he grew up here, but coming back, 40 years later, it's so much different than what he remembered. So even he felt like a foreigner. Now China all use like WeChat Pay. He was like struggling to like order something because it's all like technological. So it's like that generational difference, which is compounding on that. And originally I thought that going with my dad would be a lot easier because he can speak the language, but because a lot of it is Mandarin speaking, and even though he can speak Mandarin, it's not as fluent as his Cantonese. But even my dad's recognizing that his like perceptions and his opinions have been shaped by Western influence from living in Australia for like 40 years. So it's really interesting to see him, you know, walking down the same streets that he did and looking at buildings and being like, oh, that was not here before, and how much change has happened since the last time he's been here. It's kind of like a time capsule. And there is a saying that, like, you know, immigrants that immigrate from their country to another country end up preserving like the country of their time. So my dad's experience of like growing up Chinese is probably more like 70s to 80s China, and that's kind of the culture that he's preserved. But then coming back to China, it's so different, and things have advanced so much, especially with China's development in terms of like their trains, their technology, their infrastructure, their industries. It's been such a big change and development. And my dad had to leave China because his family was being persecuted by the Communist Party, so he had to go. Another thing that adds a layer of difference is the fact that because I definitely look very Chinese, I don't look like any other race. When I go up to people automatically expect that I speak Chinese, and that's nothing on them. Of course, that's, you know, normal, and I definitely look the part, but I think it adds that layer of shame of me not being able to communicate. And it also confuses the other person as well, like, you know, like people serving me and things like that, because they're like, oh, the mismatch is like really strange. And I feel like I've seen online a lot of people traveling to China. I think it's kind of trendy now to travel to China, and recently in my trip I haven't been going to very touristy places, so that might also be where I'm kind of experiencing that disconnect, because maybe the places that I'm going to, you know, they're quite local because I'm going to my dad's town and it's not really somewhere that many tourists go. So maybe the locals aren't really familiar with that many tourists, I guess. But I think another layer to that is if I did look another race, people would be more understanding of me not understanding or be able to speak Chinese. Another thing that is very interesting to think about is the intersectionality between my two ethnicities, because I am Vietnamese and Vietnamese people also look like me. I have many full-blooded Vietnamese cousins. They also look Asian, but if they had traveled to China, they probably would get the same treatment, but there isn't that expectation of them being able to speak Chinese because they are Vietnamese. So I wonder how that would be as well, like being an Asian but not being from China and not speaking the language, and how that would look. I guess with me it's a little bit different because I am technically half Chinese, so there is a bit more of the expectation internally for myself rather than like externally. I think it's also highlighted by the fact that I am not in the northern parts of China. I'm not in the traditionally Mandarin speaking parts of China. I am in the Guangdong province, I am in the Canton province, and historically we all spoke Cantonese, and there was a very distinct Southern Chinese Cantonese culture, which I feel like is slowly being erased because of the nationalization of Mandarin. So it's this weird intersectionality of Cantonese cultural erasure and also being a child of immigrant parents from a Western country, and also the intersectionality of me being a half ethnicity but also looking like a full ethnicity, if that makes sense. It's very nuanced. Really rambly thoughts about visiting China as a child of immigrants, and please let me know if you guys have experienced this, if you are children of immigrants in a Western country, because I feel like it's a very unique perspective that we have.